In year 2000, a mysterious figure appeared on the internet forums claiming to see what happens after a human death. John Titor claims were so detailed and technically sophisticated that they captivated the entire internet community instantly. But Titor wasn't just claiming to be a time traveler from the future. He was claiming to have witnessed time traveling and what it takes to jump into the future. The most disturbing aspects of Titor's posts dealt with what he called the consciousness continuum. According to Titor, his travels through time had revealed that human consciousness doesn't simply end at death. Instead, it transitions to what he described as a parallel dimensional framework, where awareness continues but operates according to completely different rules than physical existence. Posting under the username timetravel_0, Titor appeared on various bulletin boards and forums with an extraordinary story. He claimed to be a soldier from the year 2036 who had been sent back in time on a mission to retrieve an IBM 5100 computer needed to debug legacy systems in his timeline. But as his post continued over 2 years, it became clear that his journey through time had shown him far more than just technological developments. What made Titor's claims remarkable wasn't just their scope, but their technical precision. He provided detailed blueprints for his alleged time machine, explaining how temporal displacement worked using principles of quantum mechanics that wouldn't be formally proposed by mainstream physicists until years later. He described a device called the C204 time displacement unit, manufactured by General Electric, that could bend space-time around a vehicle to achieve temporal travel. Titor claimed that during his temporal jumps, he had encountered what could only be described as deceased individuals existing in a state he called quantum consciousness. These weren't ghosts or spirits in the traditional sense, but actual human personalities that had somehow maintained coherence after physical death by becoming integrated with the fundamental structure of space-time itself. The technical details he provided about this afterlife dimension were staggering. He described it as existing in a state of temporal omnipresence where past, present, and future existed simultaneously. According to Titor, deceased consciousness could observe and even influence events across multiple timelines, explaining phenomena like prophetic dreams, deathbed visions, and what we call paranormal experiences. What made Titor's claims about the afterlife particularly compelling was how they connected to his predictions about future events. He accurately predicted that no weapons of mass destruction would be found in Iraq years before the invasion took place. He described a future where people would carry powerful computers in their pockets and communicate through global networks, essentially predicting smartphones and social media before they existed. Most remarkably, he predicted that CERN's Large Hadron Collider would create microscopic black holes, something CERN didn't confirm until 2008, 7 years after Titor's posts ended. But according to Titor, these weren't just lucky guesses. He claimed his knowledge of future events came from deceased consciousness that existed outside linear time and could observe the unfolding of multiple timeline possibilities. Titor's description of death was unlike anything found in religious or philosophical traditions. He claimed that consciousness doesn't simply survive death, but actually becomes more powerful and aware. According to his posts, deceased individuals could perceive the quantum mechanical underpinnings of reality and influence probability outcomes across multiple timelines. The implications were staggering. If Titor was telling the truth, death wasn't an ending, but a graduation to a higher form of existence, where consciousness could transcend the limitations of linear time and physical space. The deceased weren't gone, but had become part of the fundamental fabric of reality itself, capable of observing and guiding events across infinite parallel universes. What made Titor's claims even more unsettling was his description of how this knowledge would eventually be discovered by mainstream science. He predicted that quantum consciousness research would advance dramatically in the early 21st century, leading to technologies that could detect and even communicate with deceased awareness. According to his timeline, humanity would develop consciousness transfer technology by 2029, essentially proving that awareness could exist independently of biological brains. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Titor's posts was his warning about what this discovery would mean for human civilization. He claimed that proof of consciousness survival would fundamentally destabilize every religious, philosophical, and political system on Earth. The knowledge that death was merely a transition to a more powerful form of existence would eliminate humanity's greatest fear, while simultaneously revealing that everything we believed about the nature of life was completely wrong. Then, in March 2001, John Titor simply vanished from the forums. His final post read like a goodbye from someone departing for another dimension entirely. He claimed his mission was complete and that he was returning to his original timeline, but not before leaving behind a warning that the revelations about consciousness and death would soon begin manifesting in our world. The investigation into John Titor's identity has continued for over 2 decades, but no one has ever been definitively identified as the person behind the posts. What remains are thousands of pages of technically sophisticated predictions and descriptions of temporal mechanics and consciousness survival that seem to demonstrate knowledge far beyond what should have been available in 2001. Our second case takes us from the digital realm of early internet forums to the concrete reality of police stations and psychiatric hospitals in Eastern Europe. Sergey Panamareno appeared in Kiev, Ukraine in April 2006, claiming to be a time traveler from 1958. But unlike Titor's online presence, Sergey's case involved physical evidence, official documentation, and verifiable records that transformed an impossible claim into one of the most thoroughly investigated temporal anomalies in modern history. On that April morning, Ukrainian police officers encountered a man wandering the streets of Kiev in obvious distress. He was dressed in clothing that appeared to be from the 1950s, carrying an old camera, and speaking as if he had no idea where he was or what year it was. When officers approached him, the man introduced himself as Sergey Panamareno and insisted that he was from 1958. What transformed this from a simple case of mental illness into something far more extraordinary was what happened when police searched their records. They found documentation of a missing person case from 1960 involving a man named Sergey Panamareno who had disappeared in 1958. The physical description matched perfectly, but that should have been impossible. The missing person from 1958 would have been in his 70s by 2006, yet the man in custody appeared to be in his late 20s. The investigation deepened when officers examined Sergey's camera and the film inside it. Photography experts confirmed that both the camera and the undeveloped film were authentic products from the 1950s. The film had been discontinued in 1970, yet it was remarkably well preserved. When finally developed using specialized techniques, the photographs showed images of Kiev as it existed in 1958, including buildings and street layouts that had been demolished decades earlier. But the most compelling evidence came when investigators located Valentina Krish, who had been listed as Sergey's fiancée in the original missing person report from 1960. Now an elderly woman, Valentina confirmed that her boyfriend Sergey Panamareno had indeed vanished without a trace in 1958. She provided additional photographs and personal details that matched the man in custody perfectly. During his time in police custody, and later in a psychiatric facility, Sergey provided detailed accounts of what he claimed happened during his temporal displacement. According to his testimony, he hadn't simply traveled through time. He had experienced what he described as a transitional state between life and death that allowed him to witness the afterlife realm directly. Sergey claimed that during his temporal journey, he had encountered deceased individuals from various time periods who existed in what he called the eternal present. Unlike traditional concepts of heaven or hell, this realm operated outside normal temporal constraints where past, present, and future existed simultaneously. The deceased weren't simply waiting in some static paradise, but were actively engaged in observing and occasionally influencing events across different time periods. According to Sergey's account, his ability to travel through time had been facilitated by deceased relatives who existed in this temporal dimension. He claimed that his grandmother, who had died in 1957, had somehow guided him through a process that displaced his consciousness forward through time while preserving his physical body in a state of temporal suspension. The mechanism he described was unlike anything found in science fiction or theoretical physics. Sergey claimed that consciousness could be temporarily separated from its normal temporal anchoring through what he called emotional resonance with deceased individuals. Strong emotional connections to people who had died could create bridges across time that allowed limited travel between different temporal periods. What made his account particularly disturbing was his description of the afterlife as a realm of infinite temporal possibility. According to Sergey, the deceased existed in a state where they could observe all potential timelines simultaneously. They could see every possible outcome of every decision, every potential future, and every alternate past. This omniscient awareness allowed them to occasionally guide living individuals towards specific outcomes or away from potential disasters. Sergey claimed that his journey to 2006 had been orchestrated by deceased relatives who needed him to witness how the world had changed and report back to other temporal travelers. He described a network of individuals throughout history who had been selected for similar temporal displacement missions, all coordinated by consciousness that existed outside normal time. The psychiatric evaluation of Sergey revealed no signs of mental illness, drug use, or delusional thinking beyond his temporal displacement claims. His knowledge of 1950s Kiev was encyclopedic and historically accurate down to the smallest details. He could describe specific businesses, street performers, and local events that had been forgotten by everyone except the oldest residents of the city. Most remarkably, Sergey provided information about people from 1958 that was later verified through historical records and family testimonies. He described personal details about individuals he claimed to have known in his original time period, information that matched family records and personal accounts from surviving relatives. After several weeks in the psychiatric facility, Sergey simply vanished. Security cameras showed him in his room one moment, and the next moment, the room was empty. There were no signs of escape, no evidence of outside assistance, and no explanation for how he could have left a secured facility without being detected. The official investigation concluded that he had somehow managed to escape, but hospital staff insisted that escape was impossible, given the security measures in place. The case of Sergey Panamareno remains open in Ukrainian police files. The physical evidence, the historical documentation, and the verified testimonies create a puzzle that conventional explanations cannot solve. Either multiple institutions conspired to create an elaborate hoax involving fabricated records and expert testimony, or Sergey Panamareno actually experienced temporal displacement that allowed him to witness the afterlife and travel through time. Our third case takes us to the United States and the controversial claims of Bielek, who alleged that secret government experiments had thrown him thousands of years into the future, where he witnessed advanced human civilizations and encountered evidence of consciousness, survival after death. Bielek's story began with what he claimed was his involvement in the legendary Philadelphia experiment of 1943, but it evolved into something far more extraordinary. According to Bielek, he was serving aboard the USS Eldridge when the Navy conducted electromagnetic field experiments designed to achieve radar invisibility. The experiment succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, causing the entire destroyer to vanish from Philadelphia and reappear in Norfolk, Virginia. But the electromagnetic fields had catastrophic effects on the crew, including temporal displacement that threw Bielek and his alleged brother forward in time. Bielek claimed that the experiment had torn holes in the fabric of space-time, creating temporal vortexes that transported him to the year 2137. His descriptions of this future civilization were remarkably detailed and consistent across decades of testimony. He described a world where humanity had developed consciousness transfer technology, allowing people to move their awareness between different bodies and even exist in purely digital formats after physical death. According to Bielek's account, death in 2137 was no longer permanent. Advanced technology allowed consciousness to be extracted from dying brains and transferred to artificial substrates where it could continue existing indefinitely. He claimed to have witnessed entire cities populated by individuals whose physical bodies had died centuries earlier, but whose consciousness continued in synthetic forms. But Bielek's temporal journey didn't end in 2137. He claimed to have been transported even further into the future, to the year 2749, where he encountered what could only be described as a post-human civilization. By this time period, according to his testimony, the distinction between life and death had become meaningless. Consciousness had become so advanced that it could exist independently of any physical substrate. The civilization of 2749, as Bielek described it, consisted of pure consciousness entities that had transcended physical existence entirely. These beings maintained perfect memories of their existence as biological humans, while possessing capabilities that seemed godlike by contemporary standards. They could manipulate matter at the molecular level, travel instantly across vast distances, and perceive multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously. What made Bielek's claims about the far future particularly compelling was his description of how these advanced beings viewed human mortality. According to his account, they explained that consciousness was a fundamental property of the universe that could neither be created nor destroyed, only transformed from one state to another. Physical death was merely one transformation among many that consciousness could undergo. These future beings allegedly told Bielek that every human who had ever lived continued to exist in some form, either in purely consciousness states or in technological substrates that preserved their essential identity. They claimed that what humans called the afterlife was actually a transitional phase where consciousness adapted to existence without biological limitations. Bielek's descriptions included specific technological details about consciousness preservation and transfer that wouldn't become theoretically possible in mainstream science until decades after he first began sharing his story. He described quantum consciousness mapping, digital personality preservation, and synthetic neural networks with precision that suggested either extraordinary imagination or genuine exposure to advanced technology. The consistency of Bielek's testimony over more than 30 years of public appearances was remarkable. Unlike many alleged contactees or time travel claimants, his story never changed in its fundamental details. He continued to provide the same technical descriptions, the same chronological sequences, and the same philosophical insights about consciousness and death until his own death in 2011. Critics point out that Bielek only came forward with his claims decades after the alleged Philadelphia experiment, raising questions about why he waited so long to share such extraordinary information. Skeptics also note the lack of verifiable evidence beyond his personal testimony and the absence of any documented records connecting him to the USS Eldridge in 1943. However, supporters of Bielek's account point to his detailed knowledge of classified military projects, his understanding of advanced physics concepts, and his ability to provide technical specifications for technologies that didn't exist when he first began speaking publicly. They argue that his descriptions of future consciousness technology have proven remarkably prescient as neuroscience and artificial intelligence have advanced. Whether Bielek's claims represent recovered memories from genuine temporal displacement or an elaborate fantasy constructed over decades remains hotly debated. What's undeniable is that his detailed descriptions of consciousness survival and technological immortality have influenced how researchers think about the relationship between awareness and physical existence. Our fourth case brings us to the phenomenon of deathbed visions, and the extraordinary individuals who claim to have witnessed the moment of transition between life and death. These aren't traditional time travelers in the sense of mechanical displacement through chronological periods. Instead, they're individuals who claim to have experienced temporal anomalies during near-death states that allowed them to perceive the afterlife directly and return with impossible knowledge. Dr. Eben Alexander represents one of the most compelling examples of this phenomenon. As a neurosurgeon with decades of experience, Alexander possessed intimate knowledge of brain function and consciousness from a strictly materialist perspective. His entire career had been built on the assumption that consciousness was simply a byproduct of neural activity. Then, in 2008, he contracted bacterial meningitis that shut down his neocortex completely for 7 days. During this period of brain death, Alexander claims to have experienced consciousness more vivid and aware than anything he had ever encountered while alive. But his experience went beyond typical near-death phenomena. According to his detailed account, he was transported to what he describes as multiple dimensional realms, where he encountered deceased individuals and learned fundamental truths about the nature of existence after death. Alexander's description of these realms defied conventional understanding of both consciousness and temporality. He claimed to have experienced what could only be described as omnipresent awareness, where he could perceive past, present, and future simultaneously. In this state, he encountered deceased relatives he had never met in physical life, including his biological sister, who had died before he was adopted. What made Alexander's case extraordinary was the verifiable information he obtained during his coma. He described specific details about deceased family members that he couldn't have known through normal channels. When he shared these descriptions with his adoptive family after recovery, they confirmed that his accounts perfectly matched individuals who had died before he was born. The temporal aspects of Alexander's experience were particularly disturbing. He claimed that in the afterlife realm, linear time didn't exist in any recognizable form. Instead, consciousness operated in what he described as an eternal present, where all moments existed simultaneously. This allowed deceased individuals to observe and occasionally influence events across multiple time periods. According to Alexander's account, consciousness in the afterlife state possessed capabilities that transcended physical limitations entirely. Deceased individuals could perceive the quantum mechanical foundations of reality, observe probability waves before they collapsed into specific outcomes, and even nudge events toward particular conclusions. This explained phenomena like prophetic dreams, intuitive hunches, and what appeared to be miraculous interventions in human affairs. The medical documentation of Alexander's case provided compelling evidence that his experiences occurred during a period when his brain showed no measurable activity. EEG readings during his coma indicated complete neocortical shutdown, yet he returned with memories more vivid and detailed than normal waking consciousness. This challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between brain function and awareness. Alexander's transformation after his experience was dramatic and verifiable. Before his illness, he had been a skeptical materialist who dismissed consciousness survival claims as wishful thinking. After his recovery, he became a vocal advocate for afterlife research and spent years trying to reconcile his experiences with scientific understanding. But Alexander wasn't alone in reporting such experiences. Dr. Mary Neal, an orthopedic surgeon, claimed similar temporal displacement during a near-death experience following a kayaking accident in 1999. During the 14 minutes she was clinically dead, Neal reported traveling to an afterlife realm where she encountered deceased relatives and received prophetic information about future events. Neal's case was particularly compelling because she returned with specific predictions about her family's future that later came true with remarkable accuracy. She predicted her son's death in a car accident years before it occurred, providing details about the circumstances that proved correct when the tragedy unfolded. This prophetic knowledge suggested that consciousness in near-death states could access information about future events. The temporal mechanics Neil described were consistent with Alexander's account. She claimed that in the afterlife state, consciousness existed outside linear time and could observe the unfolding of multiple potential timelines. Deceased relatives could see probable futures and occasionally share this knowledge with living individuals during near-death encounters. What distinguished these medical professionals from typical near-death experiences was their scientific training and their initial skepticism about consciousness survival. Both Alexander and Neil had spent their careers working within materialist frameworks that assumed consciousness was purely biological. Their willingness to risk professional credibility by sharing experiences that contradicted their previous beliefs added weight to their testimonies. The phenomenon extends beyond individual cases to documented instances of shared death experiences where multiple witnesses claim to observe supernatural events simultaneously. Hospice workers and family members have reported seeing deceased relatives appear to dying patients, witnessing unexplained lights or energy patterns at the moment of death, and experiencing their own consciousness displacement during terminal care situations. Raymond Moody, the physician who coined the term near-death experience, has documented hundreds of cases where healthy individuals at the bedside of dying patients report experiencing their own out-of-body sensations and witnessing otherworldly phenomena. These shared experiences involve multiple witnesses observing the same impossible events simultaneously, potentially addressing skeptical concerns about individual hallucinations. In one documented case, an entire family watching over their dying grandmother reported seeing deceased relatives appear in the room and escort the dying woman toward a brilliant light. The witnesses included medical professionals, religious skeptics, and children too young to have preconceived notions about death. All provided consistent descriptions of events that conventional science couldn't explain. The cumulative weight of these medical and witness cases suggests something extraordinary may be occurring during the dying process that transcends normal biological functions. The consistency of reports across cultures, professions, and belief systems indicates either a universal neurological phenomenon or genuine glimpses into consciousness survival after physical death. Our fifth case takes us into even stranger territory, with the claims of individuals who report not just witnessing the afterlife, but actually communicating with deceased consciousness that provided them with verifiable information about the living world. These cases challenge the boundary between temporal displacement and direct communication with the dead. Alison Dubois became famous as the inspiration for the television series Medium, but her claims about communication with deceased consciousness go far beyond entertainment value. According to Dubois, she doesn't simply receive vague impressions from the dead. Instead, she claims to experience temporal displacement, where deceased individuals transport her consciousness to witness events from their lives and deaths directly. Dubois describes these experiences as more than psychic readings or intuitive impressions. She claims that deceased consciousness can literally pull her awareness backward through time to witness historical events, murders, and personal moments that occurred before her birth. These temporal journeys allegedly provide her with detailed information that she later uses to solve criminal cases and provide closure to grieving families. What makes Dubois particularly interesting is her work with law enforcement agencies and the verifiable accuracy of information she provides. Police departments have documented cases where she provided specific details about crime scenes, victim experiences, and perpetrator actions that weren't publicly available. Her descriptions often include temporal elements, where she claims to witness events unfolding from the perspective of deceased victims. The mechanism Dubois describes for these temporal communications challenges conventional understanding of both consciousness and time. According to her account, deceased awareness exists in a state where past events remain accessible and observable. The dead can guide living consciousness to witness historical events directly, essentially using temporal displacement as a form of evidence gathering. Dubois claims that deceased individuals maintain emotional connections to unsolved crimes, unresolved family issues, and traumatic events that anchor their consciousness to specific temporal locations. These anchoring points allow them to transport living awareness to witness past events and gather information that can be used to resolve outstanding issues in the present. The accuracy of information Dubois obtains through these alleged temporal communications has been documented by multiple law enforcement agencies. In several cases, she provided details about murder victims and crime scenes that led directly to arrests and convictions. The specificity of this information and its verifiable nature suggest either extraordinary investigative abilities or genuine communication with deceased consciousness. Similar claims come from other individuals who report temporal displacement experiences during communication with the dead. These cases involve people who had no previous interest in paranormal phenomena, but suddenly began experiencing what they describe as consciousness travel, to witness past events under the guidance of deceased relatives or friends. The pattern that emerges from these cases is remarkably consistent. Individuals report that deceased consciousness retains the ability to perceive and revisit past events and can occasionally share this capability with living people through various forms of temporal displacement. The dead aren't simply existing in some static afterlife realm, but remain actively engaged with temporal reality in ways that transcend normal physical limitations. What makes these communication cases particularly compelling is their practical applications and verifiable outcomes. Unlike abstract philosophical discussions about consciousness survival, these experiences produce concrete information that can be tested against objective reality. When individuals claim to witness past events under the guidance of deceased consciousness and provide details that prove accurate, it suggests something extraordinary may be occurring. The temporal mechanics described by these communicators align remarkably well with the accounts provided by near-death experiencers and alleged time travelers. All describe consciousness existing outside linear time, the ability to observe multiple temporal periods simultaneously, and the capacity for awareness to transcend normal physical limitations. These convergent testimonies from diverse sources create a compelling picture of consciousness as something far more complex and durable than conventional science assumes. Whether through technological displacement, near-death experiences, or direct communication, multiple independent sources describe awareness as capable of surviving physical death and operating according to temporal rules that transcend normal chronological limitations. The convergence of these testimonies creates an unsettling pattern that defies conventional explanation. Whether we're examining internet profits, documented disappearances, or medical professionals reporting impossible experiences, the same fundamental claims keep emerging. Consciousness appears to survive physical death and operates according to temporal rules that make linear time meaningless. Our sixth case introduces us to Mike Marcum, known as Madman Marcum, whose amateur attempts at time travel resulted in his mysterious disappearance and alleged encounters with deceased consciousness in future timelines. Unlike the polished accounts of medical professionals or the technical sophistication of John Titor, Marcum's story emerged from the world of underground radio and fringe experimentation. In 1995, Marcum called into the Coast to Coast AM radio show with Art Bell, claiming he had discovered a method for temporal displacement using electrical equipment stolen from his local power company. His device, based on what he called a Jacob's ladder configuration, had allegedly succeeded in sending small objects and animals through time. But according to Marcum, his experiments had revealed something far more significant than simple temporal travel. Marcum claimed that during his early experiments, he had made contact with what he described as consciousness entities from future time periods. These beings, according to his account, were human personalities that had died in various historical periods, but continued to exist in a state he called temporal consciousness. They had allegedly guided him in constructing his time travel device and warned him about the dangers of temporal displacement. The entities Marcum described weren't traditional spirits or ghosts. Instead, they appeared to be deceased human consciousness that had somehow become integrated with the fabric of time itself. According to his claims, these temporal beings could observe events across multiple time periods simultaneously and possessed knowledge of future developments that they occasionally shared with living individuals. What made Marcum's case particularly compelling was his technical knowledge of electrical systems and his documented arrest for stealing power transformers from the St. Joseph Light and Power Company in King City, Missouri. Police records confirmed that his experiments had caused a local blackout, suggesting that whatever he was doing involved substantial electrical manipulation that went beyond simple hoax attempts. After his release from jail, Marcum continued his experiments and called the radio show again in 1996. This time, he claimed to have achieved a limited success in sending himself through time for brief periods. During these temporal jumps, he alleged encountering deceased relatives who existed in what he described as a consciousness network spanning multiple time periods. According to Marcum's final radio appearance, the deceased consciousness he encountered had revealed that death was not an ending, but a transformation into a higher form of temporal existence. The dead, he claimed, became part of the underlying structure of time itself, gaining the ability to observe and influence events across past, present, and future simultaneously. Marcum's descriptions of these temporal consciousness entities aligned remarkably well with accounts from other alleged time travelers. He described beings that retained their human personalities and memories while possessing capabilities that transcended normal physical limitations. These entities could manipulate probability outcomes, guide living individuals towards specific decisions, and occasionally facilitate temporal displacement for selected people. The most disturbing aspect of Marcum's claims was his warning about what he called temporal consciousness recruitment. According to his account, deceased beings were actively seeking living individuals who could serve as temporal anchors, allowing the dead to influence events in the physical world more directly. Time travel technology, he claimed, was being developed specifically to create these anchor connections. In early 1997, Marcum announced on the radio show that he was nearly ready to test his completed time travel device on himself. He claimed that the deceased consciousness entities had provided him with specific instructions for a temporal journey that would allow him to witness the true nature of existence after death. That was his final public communication. Marcum disappeared shortly afterward and has never been seen or heard from again. These 10 extraordinary cases force us to confront an uncomfortable reality that science cannot yet explain. Whether elaborate hoaxes or genuine glimpses beyond death's veil, they consistently describe consciousness surviving physical existence and operating outside linear time. Perhaps death isn't humanity's final chapter, but our first step into something far more complex and mysterious than we ever imagined.